Buenos días a todos, o buenas tardes. It's good to be here. Welcome to all. We will be talking about the agribusiness potential of Colombia today. Our slogan at Agribusiness is unlock the potential of Latin America. And that is also what we want to highlight in this series of webinars that we're doing today. As I said, focusing on agriculture in Colombia, because our idea is always as a company and in these webinars to show specific pockets of potential across the region that could be interesting for foreign investors, foreign companies looking to do business in Latin America. So to start with, I would like to give you a short overview, maybe some key data on the agricultural sector in Colombia. Colombia has been named by the United Nations FAO as one of the world's food suppliers or world's bread baskets that can help feed the planet. At the same time, only approximately 8% of GDP make up Colombia's economy at the moment in agriculture. The country is one of the largest countries in regards to area in South America. It has approximately 40 million hectares of agricultural lands, of which only approximately 5 million are actually being cultivated. At the same time, and contrary to many countries in the world that have large areas of unpopulated and potentially arable lands, Colombia has a lot of water resources. It receives a lot of sunshine. It has different climatic conditions across the countries, and in many of those ideal conditions for agriculture. Yet, a lot of challenges remain. One of them is the lack of infrastructure. Another one is the lack of productivity in the agricultural sector. Colombia also, unfortunately, has a lot of complex and sometimes even contradicting and cumbersome regulations and laws. But at the same time, we see that measures are being taken to improve the situation and also the competitiveness of the Colombian export sector. Over the past few years, and some of those projects are still ongoing, the Colombian government has spent approximately $20 billion in improving infrastructure, which should also facilitate the exportation of agricultural produce. There is a lot of focus by the new government of President Petro to actually foster development in agriculture. At the same time, also to reallocate land to smallholders. Some of them were disappropriated in the past, but at the moment there is a government program ongoing that will buy approximately 3 million hectares and then reallocate this arable land in small batches to small farmers. So this as a general overview, and now, without further ado, I would like to our panelists. I'm really happy to have three experts that can shine a light from different sides on this topic. And I would like to start with Zack. If you could maybe introduce yourself.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for having me. So basically, I've spent the past 9 years living and working here in Latin America. I'm currently based in Medellin, Colombia. And that's where I've been for the past 7 years, working across venture capital and private equity, and of course, farmland and agriculture for the large majority of it. So that's a little bit of me. I help foreign investors, well, as Daniel likes to say, unlock the potential of Colombia.
Alejandro.
Well, Daniel, thank you for having me here. I'm Alejandro Sáenz from Sáenz. I'm a Colombian economist, but mainly I will describe myself as a passionate grower that wants to transform the agricultural sector in Colombia, in which we bring agricultural knowledge and supplies for the growers in Colombia to increase productivity and to actually unlock that potential that Colombia could become that place that Daniel just mentioned about helping food security. So that's what we do.
And last but not least, Oscar.
Hi, thanks, Daniel. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I've been selling fertilizers for the better part of my life. I'm in charge of the emerging markets, and I'm right now located in Colombia. We are entering the Colombian market with our innovative fertilizers. That's about it.
All right, maybe I'll just start with you, Oscar. Why did you and your company choose Colombia as one of the first places in Latin America to do business in? What attracted you?
I would almost like to reply with why not. A look around you, like you said yourself, it's the potential breadbasket of the world. This country has immense possibilities, and sometimes I'm amazed about the lack of the Colombians, the lack of Colombians of seeing that. You know, they tend to take 80 years of blood, sweat, and tears in their vision of the potential of the country, and sometimes I'm really amazed about that because it's a beautiful country. The education level is quite high. Like I said, the possibilities are immense. Also geographically, it is very good situated to be a FOB for the Central and South American markets.
So it's also kind of as a hub in the region. It makes sense for you guys as well to start and then from here to expand in surrounding countries.
Absolutely. I mean, if you just look at we were talking about logistics. If you just look at the amount of large ports that Colombia has, you know, it has coasts on both sides of the oceans. So yeah, absolutely. I think as far as a hub, you know, Colombia has a big potential in that as well.
Alejandro, you being Colombian and running a family business that goes back decades, how have you seen, or how are you perceiving the potential of Colombia? I know you're a bit what Oscar said, you're quite critical or at least realistic when you see the potential. You also see what is missing to actually unlock the potential of the Colombian agro sector. But how is your perception of how has the Colombian agro industry and the sector developed over the past years?
Well, personally, since I recall, everyone has been talking about the potential, and that's since I recall, so around 30 years ago. But if you go back and start speaking with my grandfather, it was already 70 years ago. And if you look at the studies and all the different articles that have been published, the potential is there already 200 years ago because of the reasons that Oscar just mentioned. So why are we not using that potential? And that's precisely what we as a company, Sáenz, we are trying to unlock by bringing these technologies into the Colombian market so that we start producing in a much better way. So what are the hurdles in a way? Because the potential is there, the land is there, the water, the people, pretty much the resources are there, but we are lacking, first of all, the tools. So Colombia is not a country that produces the inputs or the tools, as I call them, and by that I mean the seeds, the irrigation systems, the gutters, the greenhouses, all the different, let's say, inputs that you need to produce. And for that, you need to register those kind of seeds. So just to put an example, today, there's a admissibility of pepper to be sold to the US. My suppliers are Dutch suppliers in which I buy the seeds from them and then I sell them in Colombia. They produce the seeds in India. Colombia does not have import requirements to import pepper seeds coming from India. So the project is there, the potential is there, but if Colombia cannot bring the seed, how is the project going to be a success? So that's one of the hurdles that there is. So you need the tools. If the tools are not there, there's no project at all. Secondly, you need the knowledge, transfer of knowledge, because yes, we could have the Formula One car here, but who is going to drive it? We need those drivers, and those drivers need to be, let's say, trained. So that's the second hurdle I will mention. Then the third one is the land, but the land is not about who owns the land, but actually who's using the land and for what purposes. Thirdly, I will mention that it's the financing, and the financing should go not to the people themselves that are asking the loans, but for the projects that are actually could be successful and that are already have, let's say, a buyer, and that buyer contract could be the collateral to actually support the loan. So if we start thinking about all those kind of things, then we can finally, let's say, unlock the potential and really use the potential that Colombia has. Because admissibility, there is in many places of the world. Actually, the industry or the commerce minister does a good job in promoting the exports of Colombia. But if we produce with chemicals that are already banned worldwide but are used in Colombia, yes, it's admissibility, but admissibility in paper. So if the other things are then, let's say, overcome, we will be able to unlock that potential. And that's what we've been doing for the last 70 years, trying to bring these technologies. But the main hurdle is actually the Colombian regulations.
Thank you, Alejandro. And I mean, you have mentioned so many different hurdles and challenges now that I would like to drill down on a few of them, also with the other panelists. But basically, in summary, you feel, and based on also your family business trajectory and your experience, that not so much has changed in the past decades in regards to really making the like empowering the Colombian agro.
Correct. And I will say it bluntly. I've spoken to several ministers and stuff bluntly, so that's good. I studied in the Netherlands, so I know the culture. So that's a good thing. In a way, when I talk to the ministers, I tell them the picture that you promote the agricultural sector is a guy without teeth, and let's say that you are trying to say that the agricultural sector is a poor one. And I myself, when I started in Wageningen and also in the different study places in the Netherlands, by no means is the agricultural sector poor. So we need to change that mentality. And once that is done, all the other things will be seen as an entrepreneurial business. So if you look at, for examples in Colombia, bananas, coffee, flowers, or avocados, which are sectors that are being run as an enterprise, then they are exporting. Whereas all the other ones are seen as a smallholder farmer, which in itself is not bad at all. We need them and we need to work with them, but we need to empower them and give them opportunities so that they can be part of the whole chain. That's where we are missing to make those changes, but it comes first with the vision of how is the agricultural sector seen. Today, we, let's say, contribute only to 7% of the GDP in Colombia. I am confident that it should be more than 20 or even 25% of the GDP, and that will make the real peace. So this government is actually having the agenda of the agricultural sector in the top of their mind, and hopefully they are actually listening to what we're talking about, and if those hurdles are overcome, it will be a success.
Before we get to the political impact of also of the new administration, Zack, you have more like the point of view. Your angle is more like as a foreign investor or representing sometimes also foreign investment. How is the perception from that part on the Colombian agro? How is it being perceived?
Yeah, I mean, there really is limitless potential, as we've already established, when it comes to Colombian agriculture. Within a 2-hour drive of where I live, right here in the heart of Medellin, you have coffee, pineapples, blueberries, you have avocados, limes, every crop that you could look for. And the main thing is that you need to be able to operate at scale. And that's something that historically hasn't been done in Colombia. And it's really because there's been the mentality of producing one thing for one person, and that's the end of your business. So, when we increase the education around what really goes into the agriculture sector, when it comes to all of the inputs, when it comes to the finished products, the manufacturing, everything that comes, the industrial side, the international community sees it because they have seen other well-established markets like the Netherlands, for example, that is one of the most efficient agricultural market in the world. So the international market sees the potential and a way to unlock it, and really bring that global experience to a market that very well should be the hub of the Americas, being, for example, 7-hour flight from my home of the California San Francisco Bay Area and Argentina. There's no reason not to be the hub.
Thank you, Zack. We received a question from the audience, and I forgot to mention that at the beginning. I'm sorry. If anyone in the audience has a question, please feel free to write it in the chat, and then we will address those questions at the end. We will reserve enough time at the end to answer all those questions and actually get input from every panelist on your questions. Before we drill down into more micro topics, let's take a step back and take a view on the larger context, because I find that really relevant as well. Like, for you guys, how does the current geopolitical situation impact the potential of Colombian agro? We have a war going on in the Ukraine, which is another breadbasket of the world. So is Russia. Obviously, their supply will be very much reduced for the near future. We have very high inflation that is also being imported into Colombia, etc. There's a lot of volatility going on in the world at the moment. What is your point of view? How does that impact the business potential for foreign suppliers, investors in Colombian agro, and also for local producing companies? We can maybe start with Oscar.
Well, I mean, being with a company who produces and sells fertilizers, of course, the whole war in Ukraine has just made it more difficult. I mean, we first had the pandemic, where we had, of course, the change up in the logistics, where shipping became an issue, and the pricing of shipping became an issue. And it's not just only the pricing of the shipping; it was more the availability and the planability of the shipping, which created an issue. Yeah, well, I mean, Ukraine. On a personal note, I really did not expect Russia to invade Ukraine. Now they did. Yeah, I think it's a realistic future that we have to deal with. I think that besides Ukraine, I think we really do have to, as a global community, have to look at how we are feeding ourselves. I'm amazed that if I walk into a supermarket in Holland, the majority of fruits and vegetables, are not grown in Holland. They're not from Holland, even though we do grow them in Holland. We grow a whole bunch of tomatoes in Holland, but if I want to find a tomato in a supermarket in Holland that was grown in Holland, I will have a really hard time. So I think, besides of that, how we are going to use the land more effectively, I think we should really also look at the supply chains. How, I really am a fan of being more locally produced and locally consumed. And the same, and it goes back also to fertilizers. I mean, we are so globalized these days that if something happens, whether it's the pandemic or other things, that we have a serious issue, whether it's with antibiotics that come from China or with materials for fertilizers that come from Ukraine. If something happens in the supply chain, we are seriously in trouble.
Alejandro, I would like to continue here. I mean, your company imports products, technologies from abroad. How is your point of view? Does Colombia have the potential to become more resilient in regards to supply chains by purchasing, maybe even producing more locally what it needs? You mentioned it before, like what the hurdles are is technology, is education, is know-how transfer. Do you see initiatives going in that direction to do more locally and become more resilient in the face of this global volatility?
Not yet, but everything comes down to how do you see the glass? Is it half full or half empty? I actually see it that the opportunities are endless, and that's why we promote this way of growing. And for that, we are member as a company of a Dutch platform called Eat This, in which we want to promote the healthy way of growing a innocuous food. And we want to send two important messages. One to the governments is that technology companies, we want to be part of the solution of producing those kind of products, but we need those technologies to enter the countries. That's one of the messages. The second message is for the consumer. Eat this, yes, but eat this is know how is the food being produced, so that you actually ask for a better way of growing that actually goes in hand with the sustainability or the COP27 that will happen in Egypt soon in the coming weeks. So those kind of things we need to know. So it happened in the COVID, and how do I see it? COVID actually shortened that time that we as a company thought that Colombia would become that country of producing food. We were foreseeing, let's say at that time, 15 years. I think that with COVID and with Ukraine, actually that time is going to be even shorter. So Colombia could become that place if we overcome those hurdles. But in order to do that, what we as a company are leading is a whole movement in Colombia called Ahora. That Ahora, the literal translation will be now, because the evolution of the agricultural future in Colombia cannot be left over for the future, for tomorrow, for the new generations. It needs to be happening right now. So as part of this platform, we had one container being exhibited in the Fifth Avenue of New York, showing how the food was produced. COVID came, of course, the exhibition had to be shut down. And then in last year, 2021, as a company, we said to the board members of ITIS, we want to bring that exhibition to Colombia. My Dutch partners at that time told me, "Are you crazy?" And I said, "I might be crazy, but I'm a firm believer that Colombia has to be that place. And if the government is not seeing it, we as entrepreneurs are seeing it, and we need to actually have like a meeting point in which all the actors of the chain work together, and not only of the chain, but we need also writers, we need sociologists, we need artists, everyone to know how food is being produced, and in that way we start promoting the good way. So it's sharing our story, and for that we need to be part of the solution. Sometimes people say that agriculture is the problem for producing let's say a lot of problems in the environment, but at the end it is the solution to feed the world. It is the solution to have better diets, and it's the solution to have a better planet if we do it correctly. How can we do that? Learn from nature, but don't stop there. Having learned from those principles, we need to upgrade our models to produce responsibly, and then it's where everything comes to my mind, that all the governments in Colombia talk about circular economy, about sustainability, about all the beautiful things that, of course, need to happen. But for that to happen, the technology needs to be in place. If not, it's just a dialogue that anyone can say. It's not a real thing. So if that happens, then Colombia could be providing good plants, or sustainable plants, which at the end produce innocuous food for people to be well fed. So it's then sustainable people that at the end, the combination of that creates a sustainable planet. It's only if those three things happen that we are able to use the potential of Colombia. And that's why the project Ahora is becoming, let's say, a movement in Colombia, in which not at the beginning it was only private companies, together with the Dutch embassy and the Dutch Holland House, who are part of the project. A bank that is called Bancolombia also promoting the project itself. And after the fair last week of Expo Agrofuturo, I had let's say, talks with the minister herself, that they want to be part of the project, because we are all part of the solution, and alone we cannot do it. The biggest input that we need is the collaboration between all the stakeholders of this beautiful sector that is the agricultural one.
Yeah, I cannot agree more with you, Alejandro. You know, it is I also think, it's next to that, we should have more connection to where our food comes from. It's the bit of nature nurture. I mean, we are nurtured into being disconnected from our food. Whereas if you asked one of the younger generations, 5, 6, 7 years, they would actually think that a steak comes from a tree, or they just have no connection with what it takes to grow the food, what the impact is on the environment, etc., etc. And we've been very focused on having a healthy diet, but I think next to having a healthy diet, we should also have a healthy way of producing.
Alejandro, could you maybe share a link or so to the Ahora initiative in the chat, or else you can send it to me, and then after this webinar, we will send out kind of a summary of this webinar, and then we can include that for anyone who is interested to know more about that initiative, which sounds really, really interesting.
Sure.
But, maybe to continue with Zack and going back on the geopolitical impact. I mean, Zack, you have seen the impact of COVID on Colombia and of what is happening now in the world. How do you see is the geopolitical situation impacting the Colombian agro sector?
Sure. I mean, as Alejandro mentioned, it's really accelerated the growth potential here in Colombia, as we need to really bring the food trade, everything a bit closer to home. So, coming from the United States, over the past 5 years, we've imported more than half of the fruit that's come into the country. And somewhere like Colombia has massive potential due to the ecological diversity and the geography. So when you talk about everything that can be produced here in Colombia, there's no reason that we should have a shortfall when it comes to supplying grocery stores. Now, as Oscar mentioned, they might not come from down the street. We might not know, we might not know exactly the farmer that produced this tomato, this blueberry, this avocado, whatever it may be. But there's no reason that the food can't get there. And Colombia, for example, logistically speaking, actually makes more sense than a country like Mexico, where it's actually more affordable and faster to get a shipping container from the port of Cartagena into New York than it is to truck it in from Mexico. It's both more affordable, better for the environment often. And so again, there's no reason for Colombia not to be able to take advantage of these changes that we're seeing. And, when you look at the ecological diversity, we also have the ability to fill grocery stores with certain crops that normally come out of Mexico or Brazil at different times of year. So when you look at the different harvest periods, the microclimates, we can produce really all of the major crops that Colombia exports here year round and fill in the gaps that countries like Mexico and Brazil have with a much easier climate to work with. We haven't had frost like you've seen in Brazil. We haven't had drought like you've seen in Mexico.
Do you see an increased interest by foreign, especially US investors, to invest in Colombian agro?
Yeah, absolutely. I think more than anything, the biggest challenge that I've seen in that space is that we don't need nearly as much money here to make a huge impact and have a big success, especially right now when you're looking at the potential currency arbitrage with the devaluation of the Colombian peso. It's very affordable to get a large amount of land here and to produce, because really we have both the gift and the curse here in Colombia that almost anything you put into the ground is going to grow. And, that's where Oscar and Alejandro can talk more to, for example, the efficiencies that we can bring to the market here, where, we do have some of the most fertile soil in the world. Colombia is the rainiest country of the last 3 years, I believe, running. So, we have everything we need from that perspective, and investors know it and they are interested. A lot of it comes down to being able to invest and operate at scale efficiently.
Alejandro, Oscar, do you see the same trends? Can you confirm or contradict what Zack said?
No, I absolutely agree. It's all it's again,
Oscar,
there
you
is
are
some way
a bit.
to be paid.
Oscar, you're breaking up.
My break.
Yeah.
Better now.
I think so. Let's try.
Okay. Again, and then we come down again to unlocking that. All the green inside. Yeah, it is exactly the country is on almost a location. Green are there to the ship.
All right. Oscar, you're still a bit sketchy there. Okay, I hope you'll come back. Maybe now touching again on more the micro, the national level. And I'll pass that question to you first, Zack, and then Alejandro already touched on various topics there. The new government of President Petro puts a very strong focus on agriculture. As I said, they will buy and then reallocate approximately 3 million hectares of lands to smallholders. And they have basically given top priority on the development of the Colombian agricultural sector. Do you see that this is really going to work and that it is going to have a positive impact on the development of the industry, or do you have your doubts?
I mean, I certainly believe in the initiative. I of course will always have my doubts, any time. But when it comes to the platform that the president ran on, which is connecting the countryside, was really, between connecting the countryside and poverty alleviation, especially in the rural areas, that's something that, really was the focal point for this administration when they, were running for the presidency. And when you look at the other major focal point that they had, it was cutting out oil and gas and mining exploration as much as possible. And their way of substituting that GDP and that income for the country and those jobs that would be lost would be through sustainable agriculture. So, do I have my doubts about how they'll achieve it? Of course, always. But when you look at, why we're here today, which is unlocking the potential of agribusiness in Colombia, ideally, this is the government to do it when you think about it. And, the main key when it comes to how they'll achieve it is how will we continue to educate the countryside into the best farming practices and allow them to move up the value chain as well. When you look at, moving away from a fully extractive economy of growing something and sending it overseas to then producing finished products, things like roasted coffee versus green beans. When you look at coconuts, rather than selling just the coconuts, sell coconut water, right? These are for me the next major areas that Colombia will need to really grow in order to achieve the full potential. Because in order to make up for the oil and gas and mining losses, the agriculture sector needs to grow 600 times what it currently is. And I think, when you bring in operational efficiencies and moving down the value chain, it could be achievable.
Alejandro, do you believe that this administration can achieve what others haven't?
Yeah, I certainly agree on that, what Zack was saying, and I also believe it because it is the first government that is putting the agro sector in the agenda, and not in the agenda, but in the top of the agenda. And that's completely different. So the vision is there, the focus is going to be there. The how is where I have my doubts. But then again, I also see that this government is listening and is willing to, of course, focus on the communities, which is completely normal, and that should have been done before. They didn't do it. And now that they are doing it, if we are able to, let's say, put them together with the final clusters or with the industries themselves, then we can create those opportunities, those developments, and actually create opportunities in the countryside. So I put one example. We, as a country, we always talk about substitution of imports. And for that, I put the example of the Netherlands and also Belgium, in which you export a lot of French fries to Colombia. So the dispute is actually being made in the, let's say, in the Chamber of Commerce but not in the production way. And the Chamber of Commerce is Colombia putting a lot of tariff or quotes or whatever on the exports that the European Union is making to Colombia of the French fries. But then why don't we allow the seeds or the, let's say, the genetic material of the potatoes that are produced in the Netherlands to be shipped to Colombia, the seeds themselves, to create the whole chain so that the Colombian producers produce the big French fries, and then that fry is actually bought by the industry in Colombia and makes the French fries. That is not happening. Colombia is prohibiting the imports of those genetics. So what is happening that we use a variety that is a great variety. It's called the Capiro or R12. That's how it's called. And that variety is great for making the chips, but not the fries. Wouldn't it be better to allow the genetics and to create a lot of opportunities to substitute the imports? Yes, it is possible. So then if this government actually changes the how and uses the technology from other countries to produce, we can do it. And then I go into, let's say, other examples of the continent like Peru, which is a more unstable country, politically speaking, than Colombia. And if you look at the agricultural sector in Peru, it is booming. Why is that? Because the SENASA or the institutional, let's say, or the institutions of Peru looking into the agricultural sector, they are not politicized. They are actually technical people who run those kind of institutions. So that's something
maybe if sorry if I interrupt you here, but before we look across the border, that would have been my question to you. Like, what is the reason that Colombia doesn't allow the import of certain seeds, genetic material? Is that because of certain local strong interest groups that put resistance? Is it because of bureaucracy, regulations? What is the main reason?
The three that you just spoke. So of course there are some unions or associations in Colombia that do not want to enter, that do not want to allow those technologies to enter, because of course they are not producing them themselves. So they think that by blocking it, it will actually gain time for them to actually create it. But at the end, who's losing the most is the country. So that's one of them. The other thing I will say is, in a way, ignorance, that they don't know that these technologies exist. So they want to actually try to produce them here locally, which takes me to the third one, that it's more like a way of thinking that you can do everything by yourself. And the way that I, let's say, attack those kind of arguments is saying, what Colombia doesn't produce let's say, the technology of a phone. It's imported. What if Colombia says, no, we need to produce the phones locally and therefore we close our borders? Are we going to be disconnected with the world? It's in a way what we're doing. We're not letting the technology enter Colombia, so we are being disconnected from a globalized world. So that's how I put it. If we allow those technologies to enter, we have the phone, we have the computers, then we are actually having this kind of a webinar right now thanks to technology. So why don't we allow technology to enter in the agricultural sector and then start promoting what Colombia should be?
And do you see that the current administration is effectively attacking those hurdles?
How do I see it? And this may be politically incorrect, but in a way, that's how I see it, is that this government is more authoritarian in a way. And if he sees that way and he understands it, he will go that way. So if we are able to actually, let's say, plant that seed in his agenda, I'm sure he will do it.
And do you think it can be done to like transfer that mindset?
Well, if I didn't believe it could be done, I wouldn't be running the third generation of a family company. So for sure, I believe it can be done, and I always see a lot of opportunities when it comes to the agricultural sector in Colombia.
And that's maybe one of the big opportunities of the Petro government, right? Because he's kind of the outsider of the incumbent elites, and that also gives him maybe more freedom in establishing his policies, and let's hope that these key hurdles will be part of what needs to change to really create an impact.
Sure. And
Oscar,
I mean,
you were gone there for a few seconds. Good to have you back. You're still muted.
So yeah, I'm on the Caribbean coast, so things like that happen. I had a double internet, but still, sometimes double is not enough. But I'm back. Glad to be back.
I think that's a small price to pay.
Yeah.
What is your view, Oscar? The question was like, is the current government of Gustavo Petro, does it have the potential to really make a fundamental impact to the better for Colombian agro?
Well, let me first state that politics in South America is always difficult and complicated. I think especially in Colombia. I've been witness of a whole bunch of elections throughout South America, but I think, being part of the election year last year in Colombia was an eye-opener for me. Does he have the opportunity? Absolutely. And I do agree with Alejandro. It is because he is so out of the box. It might be actually possible for him to do it, but he needs to realize. And I think, by naming the focal points of his administration on agriculture and tourism, already shows that he is aware of the potential. But yeah, it needs to be done. So whether having the potential and having it done, there's a whole world between that. I do believe it can be done, and I do believe that he's going to make big steps. But if he's going to completely do it, I have my doubts.
But did his election impact your business projections in Colombia, your company? Did it change your business plans in any way?
No. I have to say we are also active in Peru, and there was a bit of an election thing there also, and a lot of people were afraid. No, we tend to not act out of fear and just wait and see what actually happens, because between what they say in the run up onto the election and the things they're actually going to do and will be able to do is a big difference.
Yeah. And you mentioned Peru now, and so did Alejandro, and that basically brings me to my last question before we then open the floor to the audience for their Q&A. For you guys, is there any country in Latin America that could serve as an example for Colombia that has maybe similar conditions but generates better results? Maybe we can go back to Alejandro. You already mentioned there. Maybe you can just continue your train of thought about in regards to Peru and maybe other countries as well.
Yeah, I was saying Peru that is more politically unstable than Colombia, but there's like a whole state policy of the agricultural sector, whereas a government policy of the government who's in turn. So that's something that is happening. But the other example that I will put is Mexico, that 25 years ago, they signed the free trade agreement with the US. At that time, they thought, okay, we are going to be in a way invaded by all the products from the US coming to Mexico. But on the other hand, they said, no, this is the opportunity for us to produce and to actually source all the Americans. How did they do it? They opened their borders. They allowed technology to enter. And once technology entered, 25 years after, Mexico is the first exporter of produce to the US. So can it be done? Yes, it can be done. There are examples. So why don't we copy the good examples?
So basically, in regards to Peru, you already mentioned it, in the government entities that also like define and implement regulations. In Peru, they have more technical staff, less politicized, less political influence, let's say. That would maybe be one takeaway, and then in regards to Mexico, like they don't put up those artificial barriers to the import of technology.
To put it, let's say concrete, if you're going to import a production model in Colombia that actually has the greenhouse, the irrigation system, all the different things, you will need to pay tariff on each specific component of the production product. Whereas in Mexico, there's a special tariff code that if you're going to bring a production unit from elsewhere, the whole production unit does not have any tariffs at all. And that's something that the government, of course, can do. And that's what Mexico did. Then all the technology enters. It is accessible for the growers to use. Of course, there's the training and all those kind of things that we talked at the beginning. But as they are able to use those technologies, then they are able to comply with the requirements that the US is asking. Because yes, again, there's admissibility of products in Colombia, but today we're not able to bring any biological control. So to use, let's say, beneficial insects instead of chemicals that are banned worldwide. But we talk about COP27, sustainability, circular economy. There's a lot of beautiful speeches, but in reality, we are not making it happen.
Zack, where should Colombia look to as a benchmark in the region?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll just echo a little bit of what Alejandro and Oscar said about the need for free trade, the need for bringing in best practices. Colombia now has close to 20 free trade agreements, including countries like the UK and Singapore, where the entire goal is to bring in technologies. And some of that does come from what was happening in Mexico 25 years ago. That's part of the framework, is being able to bring in what is needed to maximize the agricultural output. Two countries that I like to look at in addition to Mexico would be Peru and Chile. The reason that I like to look at Chile specifically, since it hasn't been mentioned, is when you look at the amount of land that they have to work with in Chile, it's very small in comparison to Colombia. Brazil, much too large to look at from my perspective in terms of a good comparison. Same with Argentina. I'd like to look at Chile in terms of their increased efficiency. When you look at what they've been able to produce, how big of a scale they operate on for being a country with so little resources when it comes to land.
Oscar, your benchmarks, you are already obviously you have a global presence as a company. You started in Colombia. You're looking to expand to other markets. Which ones are the most attractive for you? Where could Colombia learn from?
Well, I do agree with Zack. Chile, and Peru is, although politically much more unstable, they're much more able to have an efficient production process, integrating new technology in that process. So yeah, next to Peru, it would be just like Zack said, Chile.
Okay, so there's you all agree more or less where valuable lessons can be learned. If anyone in the audience has questions, please write them in the chat, and I'll pass them on to the panelists. There is one question I will read to you guys, or you can see it here on the screen. How has the Colombian agribusiness been affected by ESG and the global push for carbon neutrality and sustainable business? Does it have priority, or is it a future challenge? Alejandro, you already talked about that a bit. Maybe you can elaborate.
Well, of course, we live in a globalized world, and that means that we need to look into those kind of things. So now the Green Deal, of course, in Europe is happening with regards to farm to fork. That is the reality, and that's what we see as a company, that we travel the world and see those different trends. Then we go to the different fairs and see the tools that could be used to actually comply with the policies that are being made. So things are happening, and everything is to be done. But if we don't allow those things to enter into Colombia, then again, a lot of very nice romantic speeches, but nothing about reality.
Yeah, I'll just add to that here, where when you look at the push for ESG and carbon neutrality specifically, it's actually been in place here in Colombia for several decades, this push. And, I've seen it, for example, in the teak industry, where there was a government incentive probably 20 years ago, where there was a goal of planting teak for erosion control and for carbon sequestration 20 years ago. And this is something that the current government is focusing on as well, is carbon credits as a way to, again, be able to minimize the impact of oil, gas, and mining. There is a push for carbon credits, especially in Europe, where that can be a major additional income stream when it comes to the countryside. In addition to what you can produce on the farm, it's what you can, sequester in terms of carbon now. And then, finished products, ecotourism, there are plenty of income streams that you can look at. And I think, carbon sequestration, carbon neutrality is going to be key moving forward.
Oscar, do you think that Colombia is up to speed in regards to sustainability, ESG, etc., or is there still a gap that needs to be closed?
We can all do more globally. So I mean, talking to are we up to speed? I think nobody's up to speed. I think we can all do more, and I think we should let go of the idea that it's a bad thing being carbon neutral. That's sometimes it's actually an added value. So are we up to speed? No, I don't think so. I do agree with what Zack said, that we are on some levels. We are in the front of the row. But yeah, there needs to be done more. And like I said, sometimes it is, people look at it as a bad thing. It's going to affect my production. It's going to affect my outcome. But that's not always a sad thing. Sometimes it can go hand in hand, being efficient in production and also being carbon neutral. For instance, we've invested in this small scale project, a coffee farmer who reforests the land, brings it back to the natural state, no invasive species, and then within that forest he grows his coffee. And to everybody's surprise, he's able to match and even subsede the production of the surrounding coffee farms. So that just goes to show that, it can go hand in hand. You can be carbon neutral, you can be sustainable, and still, make the numbers.
And this might be connected with what Alejandro said earlier, that one main aspect that needs to change is the way maybe like the Colombian agro sees itself. It needs to also change that mentality to that the Colombian farmer is a poor guy that needs to be subsidized and supported, and that is basically a victim, and empowered also, and that starts in the head. And Alejandro, you also said this Ahora initiative also tries to tell the story, to involve very different stakeholders, to really give more visibility to this potential, and to really show that this is an attractive business case. It's not a sector in need of support. It is, but not in a support of how you help a victim, but actually just support to empower even more something that is already powerful. But to show that more to the Colombian people and also to foreign players, obviously.
Yeah, that's exactly how I see it, and I know that there are a Zack, many other private equity or different venture capital. There are funds that want to come to Colombia, and sometimes the ticket it is so high that there are no even projects that can actually hold that ticket. So the money is there, the willingness to invest in Colombia is there, but we as Colombians, we need to believe that story. And it all starts by changing that mentality, because I always say, which son is going to will to work in the agricultural sector when he sees that picture, or which investor wants to invest in Colombia when he sees that picture? We need to change that. And Colombia did a great publicity a couple years ago when it said, the risk is you to stay as soon as you enter the airport, when we had all the drug cartels and everything. So that's something that, of course, we can do. Now, why don't we use that, let's say, that innovation and that creativity to create something about the agricultural sector? And it will be done if we work collaboratively. Alone, it will be simply impossible.
Like one development that I observed in Colombia over the past 10 years is how there has been like a coffee culture was born. Because when I first came to Colombia over 10 years ago, the usual Colombian coffee, the tinto, was of pretty bad quality because the good quality was being exported, and it was really hard to find a decent cup of coffee anywhere in Colombia. And how that has changed, how local coffee producers started to get into not only exporting their produce, but actually preparing it for the tourists that started to arrive in droves, and how in cities such as Medellin, for example, all those specialty single origin coffee shops started to pop up with really good baristas, with storytelling wrapped around it. That the quality, obviously, of the coffee that you are being served there, also that the prices have increased quite a lot. But this has shown that exactly this mentality was kind of born with the young generation of Colombians that were maybe more connected with the tourists as well. They realized, hey, what we export is actually much more valuable than maybe what our parents realized. And this self-esteem that has been born out of it was something really beautiful to observe to me as well, living in Colombia back then.
Yeah, I mean, I'd really like to add to that really quickly, Daniel, because I think there are two major reasons for that. One is that you do have an expanding middle class here in Colombia, and it's due to, reasons outside of agriculture as well. Tourism. Colombia is the #1 tourist destination in South America right now. And, there's been a boom in hospitality and real estate. But then you also look at the other companies in other sectors who are choosing Colombia as their hub of the Americas. You have Amazon with thousands of workers hired here in the last couple of years. You have Google, Netflix, you have Abbott Labs for a big tech name. There are a lot of companies who are choosing Colombia, and that growing and expanding middle class is going to lead to more of an entrepreneurial mindset that Alejandro mentioned maybe has been missing. And, it also helps that Colombia is very large in terms of population, with 50 million people. Colombia can be very self-sustainable, largely because there is a large growing population with a growing middle class. That Alejandro mentioned maybe has been missing. It also helps that
we can hear some echo now from somewhere, but it's basically repeating a really valid point. And our time is almost up. I think your words were great closing words, Zack. I think the potential of Colombia, not only in agro, but in many different sectors, is real. There are hurdles. Let's hope that the government will work on the right key points to make them go away or reduce them, so that more Colombian agro can be visible abroad, and that this potential will be unlocked. To the audience, we will send out a summary with the key conclusions of this webinar. I would like to take the opportunity to thank you guys, Alejandro, Oscar, Zack. Thank you very much. I think your input was really valuable. I really enjoyed the conversation with you guys. If anyone in the audience has further questions, you can also reach out to me directly, or you will find our contact details on our website, on Giarrizzo.com. And I wish you all a really beautiful weekend.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye.